Oh boy, what a great gospel reading. I'm just raring to go on this one, boy. Could have taken a vacation day today, couldn't I? Yeah. I'm sure it was just as uncomfortable then as it is today to hear those words. What light through yonder window breaks is the title of my sermon. Years ago, I was in a preacher's group, and we talked a little bit about the lectionary readings, and for this Sunday's readings, one of the people at that table said, this would be a good time to preach on adultery. With my mouth hanging open in shock at his statement, I thought, is he missing the point? Now, 3 years ago, I did preach on that particular part of Jesus' words about divorce and adultery. So if you want to see that one, go on YouTube and look for this date, 2017. At that day, after the preacher's group, I went home. And I naively typed in Googled the word adultery. And what I got was 122,000 invitations to commit adultery. But what I learned was an adulterer is basically someone unfaithful. So when we read the Old Testament prophets, for example, a backsliding Israel commits adultery on God by being unfaithful to their relationships, or to their relationship with God, called a covenant. In other words, like, for example, in our Deuteronomy reading, the ancient Hebrews turned away their hearts, and they turned toward, or they bowed down to, idols. Now, there are some really fun topics in this gospel reading. Murder, judging, insult, swearing, adultery, sin, lust, evil. That's fun stuff. All of which are in our culture, are constantly being thrown into our faces. That is, if you watch TV or listen to the radio or read magazines or use a smartphone or a computer. I think when people read this part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, they weren't so much inspired as they were discouraged. He made the law impossible for anyone to keep. And then he told us to keep it. In an effort to understand, in church history, Thomas Aquinas divided Jesus' words into precepts and concepts. Precepts are moral commands, but these verses today, well, they fall under the concepts, the counsel, the instructions that we should strive for. Martin Luther, maintaining that we live in the kingdom of heaven and in the kingdom of earth, he interpreted this part of Jesus' words, his sermon, as mostly applying to the next world. Or we could hear Jesus' harsh words today as Tony Lip, the guy from the movie The Green Book, and say, hey, you talking to me? Jesus' words are divine ideals, and we should strive to keep them. But it's almost as if he is setting us up, putting these difficult commands and demands of the law upon us, only to then say they're impossible to keep. But then, here's the point. In the very next passage, he introduces a greater law. Grace. Whew. Grace. Absolute ideals contrasted with absolute grace. That's what he's doing. Now, Jesus did not proclaim the Sermon on the Mount so we would despair over our failure to achieve perfection. He gave it to show us that we all stand on level ground. He's saying we're all murderers, temper throwers, adulterers, lusters, thieves, and coveters. We all are desperate and have fallen from the absolute ideal. We have nowhere else to land but in the arms of God's absolute grace. That's the message. Years ago, in my first couple of months at my very first parish, this time of year, the kids made Valentines for all the adults. And the little red hearts there cut out, and they had little notes inside, handwritten in kids' writing. God loves you, it says. Happy Valentine's Day. You're special. Happy Valentine's Day. Have faith, one said. Happy Valentine's Day. Sorry you're so old. Once that St. Valentine Day, at St. Valentine, or himself, St. Valentine, was a real person. He lived in the 3rd century. He ministered to sick, persecuted Christians. And the Emperor Claudius finally arrested him and said, if you renounce your faith, or you will be beaten and beheaded and burned. He did not, and he was. And today, we commemorate him by sharing chocolates with one another. Americans. Anyway, at my first parish, as an idealistic priest, I was having a difficult time because our church was divided over some very controversial issues, not unlike our Methodist friends, and at that time, a third of my parish eventually walked out. There was bickering, there was whispering, there was subterfuge, there was tension, and I'm wondering the whole time, what in the world did I get myself into? Is this ministry? That Sunday after the service, I was very discouraged, and I stood at the door, and I was greeting people as they left, and one little girl, Brianna, she came about 7 years old, she handed me this Valentine. And I thanked her, and then I continued greeting people, and the line went through, and then afterwards I paused a little bit, and I pulled out the little red construction heart, paper heart, and I looked inside, and it said, God loves you, Father Rick. You're going to be a good priest. And I was immediately flooded with the Spirit. It was a tremendous encouragement to me. And my eyes got all teary, and it all became clear to me. Just focus on Him. That's what I'm called to do, not to be perfect, but to be pastoral. And keep your eyes on Him, and just try to love these people, which is all I could do, and it was enough. All that from a Valentine, from a little girl prophet. This Valentine week, I was thinking about all the crazy love story stuff. Pursuing a romantic love will make us do some crazy things. I remember as a teenager riding my bike to see my girlfriend. 30 miles I rode my bike in the rain, uphill, in February. A guy was at his girlfriend's house having dinner. He was casually playing footsie with his girlfriend under the table until her mom stopped eating, looked at him and said, "You know that's my foot, right?" It was very embarrassing. I'm sure you have crazy love stories too. I remember when Christy and I were dating. I wanted to be with Christy so much that I would go to the restaurant where she ate or where she worked, earning money for college, and I would sit at the table and I would drink 37 cups of coffee just to be in the same room with her. And I still would. And it's your fault today that I'm addicted to coffee. We should have I want to see Jesus stories too. Some I'd go anywhere at any time, anyhow, just to be with him stories. And this Valentine's Day, I was thinking about how Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet balcony scene reminds me of the true love story with God. And so I will end with this image and give it to you. Romeo, who thinks he loves this other girl, Rosaline, meets Juliet, and feeling the love that only a poet can feel, he sneaks over to Juliet's home after the party, crawls over the garden wall into the courtyard, and stands beneath her balcony, quietly, so as not to disrupt the household. Because you see, Juliet is a Capulet, and Romeo is not. Romeo is a Montague, and a feud exists between the two. Many Shakespearean scholars believe the enmity between the Montagues and the Capulets represented the tensions between Protestantism and the Catholics. In England, at the time of Henry VIII, a Catholic, who died, and Edward VI, a Protestant, came, and then Mary, a Catholic, took the throne, and then died, and Elizabeth, a Protestant, took the throne, all within the span of a single decade. Here at the balcony, Romeo whispers his famous lines, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." She is not the moon. Rosaline was the pale moon compared to Juliet. Rosalie represents the plastic glamour of this world, the imitation light of culture. But Juliet, she is the sun. Juliet is the Christ figure, and Romeo is the church. And this scene is all about salvation. Juliet leans her gentle frame against the railing, vowing her love for him. Romeo is silent beneath her. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father, refuse thy name, no longer be a Capulet." Christ's love proclaims who we are, the natural man for the spiritual man, the old self for the new creation. And Romeo, hearing the invitation of heaven, responds, "I take thee at thy word, and I shall be baptized and never be Romeo." He will hold nothing back. He is willing to be dashed on the rocks, to submerge into the baptismal waters in exchange for a relationship in order for pure love to take place. In death, they are united for eternity. Christ is our Juliet. What we feel for him now is but a shadow of what we will feel for him in glory. He gives himself to us just as Juliet gave herself to Romeo. Today, Jesus' gospel, believe it or not, is a balcony call that requires everything we have and then some to die to our old self, to embrace the Son, because it's your greatest love story and the pursuit of your life. Amen.